Well, good morning. We're in Psalm 125 today. It's another of the Ascent Psalms. And you should see that there's a pattern in these Psalms, a repeating message often of trust and confidence in God in trouble. I think the repetitive nature of the Psalms remind us that we need to be reminded that God will help us. And so often as we move through life, we get into the midst of our struggles and troubles and hardships, and we lose sight of who God is and how He cares for us. And so this is a good psalm that reminds us that ultimately, that in the end, even though we may be in the trouble, God will help us. And He will bring us stability, and He will be faithful to us. In America, we're so bent on getting out of trouble all the time. Really, it's probably a common problem to all of us humans that maybe it's not a problem, maybe it's just who we are, right? We just want to be at peace. And so this psalm is helpful for all of that, to remind us that in the middle of it, there's a stability that comes by trusting in God. So if you look at verse 3 of the psalm, it says, "The scepter of the wicked will not remain over the land allotted to the righteous, for then the righteous might use their hands to do evil." There's just this idea that the wicked scepter is a kingdom or king that is in charge of the people, and it's not the way it should be. And so there's a sense that they're in the middle of trouble, they're in the middle of oppression, and that's the context for which this psalm comes to us. And so verse 1, it says, "Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be shaken, but endures forever." And so we don't do mountains very well in Michigan. Like, we don't know mountains, we know farmland, right? But if you go to the Rockies, if you go to other parts of the world, if you go to Utah, you see mountains, and you see how big they are, and you see how stable they are. And the psalmist makes a connection to the idea that those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion. And so it's immovable, it's unshakable, it's fully in God's hands. And then in verse 2, "As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds His people." And so there's this stability to us as the people of God who trust in Him in the middle of the trouble, that He will watch over us, that there will be stability, even though it may not feel like it in the moment. I love how verse 2 ends. It says, "So the Lord surrounds His people both now and forevermore." And that's the beauty of this psalm, that it gives us this short view and this long view. It gives us that when we're in the middle of our struggles, we know that He's going to take care of us. Ultimately, that may land in something much bigger than we even can see at the moment, that it's both now and forevermore. You know, there's a warning in the psalm too. He says this, "Lord, do good to those who are good, to those who are upright in heart. But those who turn to crooked ways, the Lord will banish with the evildoers." And then he says, "Peace be on Israel." It's just a reminder that we don't turn to unrighteous methods when we're in the midst of the trouble. And so the promise of stability is for those who trust in the Lord and trust in His ways and don't go after their own ways. There's a beautiful passage in 2 Corinthians where the Apostle Paul talks about his troubles, and he is going through it, and he reminds us these hard moments that we go through encourage us to turn to God. And he says, we don't want you to be uninformed. This is chapter 1, 2 Corinthians. We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. I mean, that's pretty serious for Paul as he writes this. He says, indeed, we had felt the sentence of death, but this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead. He has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us again. On him we have set our hope, that he will continue to deliver us as you help us by your prayers. I just love that. I just love that passage from Paul. How he reminds us that in the hard moments, they're there to help us turn to God, who makes our lives unshakable. They're like Mount Zion, our lives, when we trust in the Lord. And so if you're going through trouble right now, if you're feeling the burdens of life, and you feel like things are really unstable, I just want to remind you that both now and forevermore, the Lord has you, and he will watch over you, and you should turn to him and put your trust in him, because the psalmist says, if you do, your life will be unshakable. And it may not feel like it's unshakable, but ultimately the promise from God is that as you trust in him, both now and forevermore, even while you're in the midst of the trouble, he will keep you. He will surround you. Well, I hope this psalm encourages you today as you move through your journey. Pray that you're encouraged. Pray that you experience the beauty of who God is and his unshakable grace in our lives. So, God bless, and we'll talk again.